Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines that we're tracking for you this evening. It's election day in America. Opinion polls point towards a dead heat between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Over 50% of eligible voters have already cast an early ballot. Trump and Harris split the 6 votes at Dixville Notch in New Hampshire, where polling was held at midnight in line with the decades-old tradition. A late recovery lifts Dalal-Street. Nifty gains over 200 points, moving back above 24,000. Investors tread with caution across the world as the US begins to vote in what promises to be a cliffhanger. The Indian government weighs potential compensation for oil marketing companies as under-recoveries from LPG skyrocket. Sources say under-recoveries have risen from nearly 1,100 crore rupees to more than 17,000 crore rupees in the first 6 months of this financial year. Israel attacks a hospital and makeshift tent camps in Gaza, killing at least 29 people in the last 24 hours. The death toll in Lebanon crosses 3,000 as the bombing campaign continues. In a landmark ruling, a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court limits the state's power to seize private property by overturning a 1978 verdict. The apex court rules all private resources cannot be nationalized and India cannot have the imposition of socialism as a single economic theory. India takes the first step to host the 2036 Summer Olympics. The Indian Olympic Association sends a letter of intent to the International Olympic Committee. IOC Chief Thomas Bach had told CNBC TV18 last year that India can make a strong case to host the Olympics. The winter session of Parliament will begin on the 25th of November and end on the 20th of December. The session will have 20 sittings. After 8 weeks, Boeing workers in the US call off their strike, clearing the way for the aircraft maker to restart its factories. Workers vote in favor of a contract that delivers a 38% increase in wages. Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon and Meta spend a cumulative $60 billion in AI infrastructure in the last 3 months. That's a 60% increase from the same period last year. Big Tech is pledged to spend $200 billion on AI this year. That's a CNBC TV18 analysis. Well, straight to the big story this evening. The United States is choosing its next president, and the race seems to be too close to call. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris neck and neck as millions of Americans head to the polling booth to cast their votes. Now, over 82 million people have already cast early ballots. Out of the total votes cast so far, are men. Key swing states like North Carolina and Georgia have also seen record voter turnout. Kamala Harris held her last campaign rally in Pennsylvania, a state that could hold the keys to the White House. The rally was attended by a whole host of celebrities, including Oprah Winfrey, Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, and many more. Harris avoided using Trump's name in her address, which was largely upbeat, and she promised to get to work after the elections. Both campaigns ended with starkly different moods. Trump held his last rally in Michigan, which is also a swing state, launched into an attack on immigrants, calling for a death penalty for any immigrant who kills an American citizen. Trump also attacked Kamala Harris and his running mate J.D. Vance, called Harris garbage at the Michigan rally. Meanwhile, the first election day results have in from New Hampshire. It's a tie between Trump and Harris. The tiny community of 6 registered voters in Dixville Notch were evenly split. Polls are held at midnight following a decades-long tradition. Here's the final message to voters from Harris and Trump.
Our campaign has tapped into the ambitions and the aspirations and the dreams of the American people. We are optimistic and we are excited about what we can do together. And we know it is time for a new generation of leadership in America. And I am ready to offer that leadership as the next President of the United States of America.
I will restore peace in the world, and I will rescue the American dream. Together, we will begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country, and we will launch the most extraordinary economic boom the world has ever seen, and we'll do it by utilizing the assets that we have. If you vote for Kamala, you will have 4 more years of misery, failure, and disaster. Our country may never recover.
And the 7 swing states, which account for 93 electoral college votes, will potentially decide the elections. But what about the non-swing states? Could they spring a last-minute surprise? Remember, Kamala Harris has grabbed an unexpected lead in a poll in Iowa, a state that had backed Trump in the last 2 elections. Sanjay Suri explains why the so-called safe states may turn out to be a headache for both Trump and Harris.
For just as long in this presidential campaign that anyone can remember, it's all been about those 7 swing states where the outcome appears uncertain and where, given the expected narrow, razor-thin margins, they could swing the scale, they could tip the scale one way or the other within the state result and, of course, all the way up to the White House. The result in the other 43 states, plus Washington, D.C., here is assumed to be done and dusted. We already know which way their vote will go, or so the pollsters say. But could there be something of a swing in any of these 43 non-swing states? Trump, consider, won Texas in 2020 by 5.5 percentage points, which is a lot, but that was down from 9% in 2016. He won Florida last time by 3.3 percentage points, up from 1.2% in 2016. All still around the margins if the margins are relatively wide enough. And margins can be fluid. Republicans are nevertheless widely expected to take both these states, Florida and Texas, unless there are factors that come into play on voters' minds not seen or foreseen by the pollsters. But there is one state, Iowa, that is where a survey suggests that Harris now leads Trump by 3 percentage points. It would be cataclysmic for Republicans to lose Iowa and for Democrats to take the state, considered as deep red a state as any politically can get.
Independent women have shifted. In earlier polls this year, they were voting in majorities for Donald Trump, and now they're in majorities for Kamala Harris. So one of the things driving this, we speculate, is that the abortion ban went into effect in July. So our June poll that had Donald Trump with a big lead shrank and then shrank again, actually with Kamala Harris leapfrogging over him into first place. One of the things that we know, 2 things. We know that a majority of Iowans think that all or most abortions should be legal.
Most people still don't expect Iowa to go Democrat or, for that matter, foresee any swing in the non-swing states. But if these calculations were to go wrong, we could see some major upsets.
Well, all eyes on those 7 swing states, but as Sanjay Suri there was reporting, you can never take anything entirely for granted in politics. So when can we expect the U.S. election results? Parikshit standing by now to explain to us between now and tomorrow morning what the outcome is likely to be. Parikshit.
Well, in less than 24 hours, we may get to know who will be the next president of the United States or not. More than 82 million out of 186 million registered voters have already voted. The remaining voters will vote today, that is 5th of November, Election Day. By 4:30 a.m. India time tomorrow, the polls will close in places like Indiana, which has 11 electoral college votes and is leaning Trump in poll projections. Also in Kentucky, which has 8 votes and is leaning towards Harris as of now. By 5:30 a.m. tomorrow, polls would close in Georgia, which could go either way, South Carolina, which is leaning Republican, and in Vermont and Virginia, which are leaning towards Harris as of now. Pennsylvania is the big prize, as no Democrat since 1948 has won an election without winning the state of Pennsylvania. The fight here is virtually tied with marginal leads for Trump and Harris in different polls. Polling is likely to end by 6:30 a.m. tomorrow, and this state with 19 electoral college votes has backed Biden in 2020. Let's also not forget to mention Dixie-Will Notch in New Hampshire at the US-Canada border. Now, this town has a decades-old tradition of midnight voting. There are just 6 registered voters here, 4 are Republican, and 2 have not really showcased their intentions or affiliations. Voting has already ended there. It's a tie between Trump and Harris. The town had unanimously backed Biden in 2020. By tomorrow morning, we may not have a winner if the margin of victory is too slim. Candidates can call for a recount, and in some states, a recount is mandatory if the winning margin is 0.5% or less. The recount is likely to delay final projections by anything between a few hours or even days. In case no candidate gets 270 Electoral College votes and there is a tie at 269, then the House of Representatives will vote to choose the president and each state will have one vote. If the tie persists, voting will continue till the candidate gets a majority.
Well, let's see what the final outcome is. I would imagine that markets world over will want the uncertainty to end. And of course, voters in America will want the uncertainty to end. You can catch our entire US election coverage from 5 p.m. onwards right here on CNBC TV18. Let's head now to the markets, trading with caution across the world as the U.S. elections kick off. It was a volatile day of trade on Dalal-Street, where a late recovery helped the Sensex and the Nifty close in the green. So both the indices managed to recoup most of yesterday's losses. The Nifty moving back above the 24,000 mark after gaining over 200 points. Bank stocks saw a sharp rally, with the Nifty Bank Index gaining nearly 2% today. The other big global story, tensions in West Asia continue to rise. At least 6 Palestinians have been killed after Israeli forces attacked their tents in central Gaza. Israeli forces have also attacked a hospital in North Gaza for a second day, wounding medical staff and patients. This includes newborn babies at the facility's nursery. Meanwhile, at least 16 people were killed and 90 others injured in Israeli attacks on Lebanon, taking the overall death toll to 3,000. Efforts to rescue survivors from the rubble continue. And oil prices eased slightly today as markets braced for uncertainty from the U.S. presidential election. This comes after prices had risen more than 2% in the past session as OPEC Plus delayed plans to hike production in December and ease supply concerns. Meanwhile, Oil Minister Hardeep Singh Puri has said that oil prices in India are expected to remain stable amidst rising geopolitical tensions. In a social media post, Puri maintained that this is because India has several options to buy crude oil. On to a CNBC TV18 exclusive. Oil marketing companies are likely to seek compensation as LPG under-recoveries continue to rise. Sapna is here with more details. Sapna, LPG under-recoveries mounting and oil marketing companies now asking the government to intervene.
Sources have indicated to CNBC TV18 that there's a definite case for OMCs to seek compensation on their LPG under-recoveries, which have really shot through, in the last 6 odd months. The rise in the LPG under-recoveries has been over 1,600 odd %. So way back in March FY24, IOC had an under-recovery of around 1,000 odd crores. BPCL, in fact, had a positive recovery on LPG sales, whereas HPCL had an under-recovery of under 100 odd crores. Now, that number is cumulatively sitting at around 17,500 odd crores. So these are big numbers that we are talking about, and these numbers are not going to go away quickly. Hence, with the LPG prices already administered, there is no pass-through happening to the consumer, so to speak. Hence, it makes sense for the OMCs to seek cash compensation from the government, and I think that will be a bit of a comfort for them. Having said that, the administrative ministry, which is Petroleum Ministry, of course, is sensitized on this issue. It remains to be seen how the cash compensation works out between the administrative ministry and the finance ministry, because the cash compensation approval has to come from there. Maybe there could be a cabinet approval that will be also needed. So we'll have to keep a watch on this space over the next 1 or 2 odd months.
Sapna Reddy, thanks for joining us. And staying with oil, oil giant Saudi Aramco's third quarter profit down 15% owing to lower crude prices and weaker refining margins. Net income also fell 5% compared to last year, despite beating its own estimates. However, the company has maintained a dividend of $31.1 billion for this quarter. Now, staying with global earnings, Japanese gaming giant Nintendo's net profit dropped 69% in Q1, while revenue fell 17% on an annual basis. The company lowered its sales forecast for its Switch console for its fiscal year ending March 2025 and cited dismal demand as the reason. A landmark verdict coming in from the Supreme Court. The Apex Court has ruled that all private resources cannot be nationalized and redistributed by the centre. A 9-judge bench overturned the 1978 verdict and limited the power of the state to assume ownership and control of private property for public good. Ashmit is standing by with the details. Ashmit, take us through the details of the order and the significance.
Well, this issue travels back nearly 50 years, 46 to be specific. Here's the context to it all. Article 39B essentially says that the state, the government, shall make policies to ensure that the material resources of the community are distributed for public good. Now, what does that mean? A 1978 judgment of the Apex Court had held that this essentially means that the government can pass orders to nationalize, to take over even private property. Now, that is something that the Apex Court today has taken objection to. The Supreme Court, in a 9-judge bench order, this is, mind you, a landmark order, a 50-year-old case being decided. The Supreme Court in this 9-judge bench configuration has clearly held that that is not consistent with modern realities, that is not tenable, and has overturned the 1978 verdict. The effects of the 1978 verdict essentially was that tomorrow, if you are a car dealership owner, the government could pass orders to take over the ownership of the car dealership as well as the cars in question. Now, that is something as a modern reality that the Apex Court is referring to, saying that back then, when this judgment was passed, 1978, there was a socialist school of thought, that the judgment itself makes references to Karl Marx, that is not consistent with modern realities, that the post-90s India has seen a sense of liberalization where public investment is coexistent with private investment, that is one aspect that India has been in fact awoken to, that India has constantly rejected any one specific economic dogma. It has traveled and migrated with the times, and modern times dictate that there is a modern interpretation of this 39B required. So essentially the Apex Court ruling that this precedent that had been set by the Apex Court, that private properties can be taken over by the centre, by the government, is no longer true. That power of the centre has been trimmed by the Apex Court.
Ashmit, many thanks. Now, India has taken the first step to host the 2036 Summer Olympics. The Indian Olympic Association, we understand, has sent a letter of intent to the International Olympic Committee. Remember, IOC Chief Thomas Bach had told me last year that India can make a strong case to host the Olympics. Take a look.
And I want your comments on a statement that came in from one of the cabinet ministers in India, the Information and Broadcasting Minister Anurag Thakur, who said that India will support the IOA's decision to bid. He used the word bid, but to potentially host the 2036 Olympic Games. Has there been any dialogue, any conversation with India?
Yes, we had sometimes a dialogue, and there were different indications from both the National Olympic Committee and but also from the government side. And this is great news for the entire Olympic movement.
So is this dialogue likely to continue in a formal fashion when you come to Mumbai as part of the IOC session?
That's just up to India. Here, our doors and our hearts are wide open.
But do you believe that there's a strong case to be made for India at this point in time as a potential host?
Yes, there is a strong case for the reasons I'm giving. You know, seeing how India is flourishing, is developing, and how India now is embracing Olympic sports.
Well, that's the IOC Chief Thomas Bach there speaking to me last year on the possibility of India bidding for the 2036 Summer Olympics. Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon and Meta have spent a cumulative $60 billion on AI infrastructure just in the last 3 months. A CNBC TV18 analysis of the big tech's rising AI spend coming up. The GST Council could accept the group of ministers' report on rate rationalisation for the insurance sector when it meets in December. Timsy standing by with more. Timsy, take us through what's likely to be on the agenda when the group of ministers meet at the end of November.
Well, what we're given to understand from sources is that the GST Council is likely to meet in December after the Maharashtra and Jharkhand elections. GST Council in this meeting is likely to study and accept the final report of group of ministers on cutting rates on life and health insurance premia. Now, what the proposal is likely to be in the final report that will be submitted to the Council? Well, the group of ministers is likely to propose that GST exemption should be there on the premium of pure term life insurance and pure term life insurance covering family members. If approved, this exemption on life insurance premia could have a revenue implication of about 213 crore rupees per annum. Similarly, group of ministers is likely to propose GST exemption on all health insurance policies for senior citizens and for non-senior citizens for a cover up to 5 lakh rupees. Again, if approved, this provision could have a revenue implication of about 2,100 crore rupees per annum. Remember, the group of ministers last met in Delhi on October 19, discussing the proposal, and over there a slew of meetings, slew of discussions with the fitment committee panel, etc. also took place, after which a calculated call was taken to present this report. Let's see what happens when they meet in December.
All right, Timsy, many thanks for joining us. Tech giants have pledged to spend $200 billion on AI-related capital expenditure this year. This will mark an all-time high for these companies. Rachna is here with more. Rachna, how do tech majors intend to invest in this new frontier?
Well, AI is the new frontier for big tech. The 5 tech giants, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon and Meta, each saw AI as the centerpiece in their latest earnings report, reflecting how this technology is fundamentally reshaping their business strategies. But it's not just about the new features. They're making massive investments that could potentially redefine how we interact with this technology altogether. Together, the big tech have spent about $60 billion on property and equipment last quarter, primarily for AI infrastructure. That is up 60% from last year, and it's only expected to keep climbing. In fact, Amazon's Andy Jassy called it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity while announcing that the company would be spending about $75 billion on AI-focused infrastructure next year. And he expects an even higher number in 2025. Much of these investments are going into data centers to support Amazon Web Services' AI initiatives. These are positioned to drive growth despite the enormous costs. Now, each company is not only integrating AI into customer-facing products, like we saw Apple doing iOS 18.1, which they like to call Apple Intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, but companies are also retooling internal operations and even the code behind their platforms. Google CEO Sundar Pichai noted that AI now generates 25% of the company's new code, with engineers intervening only for reviews. This, of course, indicates a shift towards this automation, but this shift raises questions for the workforce. As AI takes over routine coding tasks, now entry-level tech jobs could look very different. Aspiring coders may now need to learn skills that will complement artificial intelligence. So the end game, what could it be? Meta, for instance, has reported that AI-driven recommendations have boosted user engagement across Facebook and Instagram, and its generative AI tools are driving higher ad conversations for businesses. As companies have now pushed to make AI smarter, faster, and more integrated into our lives, it is pretty clear that spend big strategy isn't just a gamble, it's the future. Now, they're betting on everything for artificial intelligence, but NVIDIA could be the game changer. With NVIDIA's earnings just around the corner, it is expected to add fuel to this AI race. And one thing is pretty clear, that big tech believes that AI isn't just the next big thing, it is everything.
All right, Rachna, many thanks indeed. And key earnings, pharma major Dr. Reddy's second quarter revenue ahead of estimates, rising 17%. However, profit missed expectations, falling 10% year-on-year. Vinny is standing by with more on its performance. Vinny.
So yes, Dr. Reddy is a mixed quarter that's come in. While revenue, obviously, like you were mentioning, we saw good growth at this time in terms of revenue, 16% growth. Profits and margins, that's where we saw the miss coming in. And we were expecting that miss coming in terms of margins, or a decline on a year-on-year basis for the margins, because of the change in terms of mix and some of the key products not doing well. Breaking down what has done well for them in global generics business, North America, that saw a good growth of around 17%, but this is including the Revlimid side of the business. So how has Revlimid performed? The generic Revlimid, that is something that we should be watching out for in terms of details, because that was expected to be some bit of a slowdown. Europe business, a 9% growth, while India business, as expected, has seen a good growth of around 18%. Expectation was 16%. So slightly bit of an improvement in terms of India business versus the expectation. Emerging markets too saw a good growth of 20%. So generic business, they managed to see a good growth, while the pharmaceutical service side business and the API business, that's seen a growth of 20%. So that's the breakdown coming in. Margins, as expected, a bit under pressure this time.
All right, Vinny, many thanks for joining us. Now, we are minutes away from polling officially beginning across several U.S. states. Remember, early ballots have been cast. In fact, 80 million early ballots have already been cast. The woman vote could play a pivotal role in deciding the winner this time around. Archana joins us now to explain why women voters matter in this election. Archana.
Thank you, Shireen. Like India or any other country, the woman vote plays a very big role in deciding the outcome of any election. After Hillary Clinton, for the second time in a decade, a Democratic woman is running against Donald Trump in the presidential elections. Now, both are fighting for every last vote in what is perhaps the most down-to-the-wire presidential race in the modern U.S. history. Now, experts say that a small increase in turnout by women voters, white voters with college degrees and voters of color could deliver a result that puts Harris in the lead over Trump. As per NBC polls conducted in July, September and October, they found that 51% Gen Z men are supporting Trump as opposed to Harris, who has garnered 41% support, whereas 68% Gen Z women support Kamala Harris as compared to 26% women who are likely to support Donald Trump. The issue at heart is that of abortion, which could drive voters' decisions in this election. Remember, this is the first presidential election since the U.S. Supreme Court took away the national right to abortion and control over reproductive choices for millions of women across America. Trump has throughout the campaign shifted his views on abortion. He's repeatedly taken credit for the Supreme Court's reversal by choosing the judges who gave the judgment. However, very recently, he softened his position. He said that he no longer advocates for a national abortion ban. He's also called himself the father of IVF. While Kamala Harris has made abortion rights a focal point of her campaign, she's vowed to restore reproductive freedoms and has promised to support a bill to veto any national abortion ban. Let's take a look at some quick data points. According to Rutgers University, women have registered and voted at higher rates than men in every presidential election since 1980. Black women are the Democratic Party's most loyal voting bloc, with more than 90% typically voting for Democratic candidates. In 2016, 47% of white women voted for Trump. In 2020, their support for Trump surged to 53%. Talking of the woman vote, Shireen, there's a political video also doing the rounds. It's been voiced by Julia Roberts that's asked women voters to secretly vote for Kamala Harris without telling their pro-Trump husbands. Now, while Trump may be entering his rallies to James Brown's song, "It's a Man's World," it remains to be seen whether the women will send Kamala Harris to the White House. Back to you.
Well, thanks very much, Archana. It certainly is not a man's world. Let's see which way the vote finally swings. This is a crucial election, and not just those swing states, but the women turnout and the women vote will matter whichever way it decides to go. With that, it is time for us to wrap this edition of Business 360. More news and updates will continue right here on CNBC TV18. Stay tuned. We're back in a moment with more.